Welcome to another Bike Fitness Coaching Tech video where we will today discuss how to replace a KICKR bike crankset or a KICKR bike shift crankset with our current KICKR custom crankset. Included in the set is a 24mm axle, a KICKR compatible spider, a left and right or non-drive side and drive side crank arms, available in 140, 145, 150, 55, 60, 65, 67.5, 70, and 172.5 millimeter length. You also get a couple 1 mil spacers to move the axle slightly to the left or to the right when you put the bike back together again. Very simple process. Step one will be to build the new crank arm assembly, and we're going to attach the spider to the crank arm. The tools you will need are a T20 Torx wrench, and what we're going to do, you will have a crank arm with a spider, and there's going to be 8 screws, so we recommend 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in that order. You're going to hand tighten them first or hand start them and then use a T20 Torx wrench to tighten them up to 4 Newton meters. From there, we can now attach the spider and crank arm to the axle, or what some people call the spindle. We'll call it axle here. You can hold this with your left hand and hold this with your right hand and just tighten the 8mm screw to about 60 to 65 Newton meters. Just get it started, and then you can hold the crank arm, tighten it on, and now you have a one-piece spider, crank, and axle setup. Next, before you do anything to the KICKR bike, you're going to remove the pedals. It's much easier to remove the pedals while they're currently on the bike than to remove the crank arm and then try to remove the pedals. Step 4, we're going to remove the non-drive side pedal first. So what we're going to do is either use a 8mm Allen wrench or a pedal wrench, and you're going to put it into the back or the front of the pedal, depending. The pedal wrench would go on the front for pedals that have flat parts, 15mm flat spots, or most other modern pedals have the 8mm axle. And we're going to put the Allen wrench in, point it backwards, and push down. That will loosen the non-drive side pedal. Go ahead and remove it. For the drive side pedal, it's the same thing. We're going to insert the 8mm Allen wrench, point it as backwards as you can, and step on it or push down, and that will loosen the pedal, and then you can remove the pedal. If you do notice, the plastic fairing is in the way, so you're going to have to kind of move the crank arm around where you can get purchase onto the pedal spindle with the Allen wrench. Go ahead and remove the pedal as well. Next, we're going to remove the non-drive side crank arm. So what we're going to do is loosen a pinch bolt. Pick one or the other, loosen it, do not remove it. Flip the crank around and there will be a second pinch bolt. Go ahead and loosen it, do not remove it. Once the pinch bolts are loosened, we can now remove the preload bolt. So we're going to unscrew it all the way, and you can remove this but leave the pinch bolts attached. Once the non-drive side crank arm is removed, we can go ahead and remove the 5mm hex bolts that are on a regular road bike or regular bicycle are called chainring bolts. These bolt the crank arm to the Wahoo KICKR pulley wheel. So go ahead and remove all 5 and keep them aside because we're going to reuse them when we attach and remount the new crank. Once you have everything loose, the left side crank arm, non-drive side crank arm is removed. Here is a preload bolt. Sometimes you will need to tap the axle from the non-drive side into the drive side to remove it. Sometimes there's a little bit of rust or a little bit of wear that basically hooks onto the bearings, so you need to tap this out slightly. Do not hammer hard, but you can tap this out and then kind of wiggle it, and the drive side crank should be removed easily. So here's where we are going to install the new custom crank. Tools needed: a rubber mallet and a 5mm Allen wrench to reinstall the chainring bolts. Go ahead and grease up the axle and grease on the inside of where the bearings are. And go ahead and you will be getting two 1mm thick spacers. We had to install two spacers on the non-drive side, not the drive side. So go ahead, and you might have to do it on yours. We did it on the non-drive side on ours, and that's because the spider is slightly thinner on the, or I should say a lower profile on the custom crank than the native Wahoo crank. So it's going to push the crank assembly slightly toward the non-drive side, and that caused the inside of the crank assembly to rub on the plastic housing or shielding, and we just added a couple spacers. It moved the drive side over just enough where it worked perfectly. Go ahead and add a little bit of grease. You're going to tap this axle in to the point where the tabs on the spider are coming into contact with the pulley wheel. So go ahead and line everything up. You might have to pull the pulley wheel up and forward because there's going to be tension on the belt. So kind of wiggle it in and it should snap right in, and start hand tightening or hand installing the 5 chainring bolts. And once those are making sure you're hand tightening it so you don't cross thread. These are easy to cross thread. They will fit perfectly on the new crank assembly. Go ahead and install them. Once they're snug, go ahead and tighten them up, and then we're getting ready for the work on the non-drive side. Now, once the drive side crank assembly is installed, you will see part of an axle coming through. We're going to first take the non-drive side crank arm, loosen the preload ring bolt. This is, for those that have done work on different crank sets, this is very similar to Rotor's preload bolt system. So we're going to loosen this, and we're going to turn this clockwise, the preload ring, so it's up against the crank arm itself. And then we're going to take the crank arm and install it at 180 degrees. If this is down at 6 o'clock, the drive side is going to be up at 12 o'clock. So we're going to use a 8mm torque wrench to 60 to 65 Newton meters, tighten this. Next thing we're going to do to lock it down, we're going to use a 5mm Allen wrench to tighten the pinch bolt. There's a single pinch bolt on this crank assembly to 7 Newton meters. And once the pinch bolt is tight, the crank arm is pretty snug. We're then going to take the lock ring and by hand turn it clockwise to take up all the space between the inside of the crank arm and the inside of the bearing assembly. So we're going to snug this up, and once it's snug, we're going to then tighten with a 2.5mm hex wrench, tighten it to a few 2 or 3 Newton meters, and then the non-drive side will be set. For the final adjustment, we're going to basically take the crank arm, take this in one hand, take the non-drive side in the other hand, and kind of twist it back and forth this way to see if there's any extra play. If there is, just go ahead and loosen the preload bolt and tighten slightly more. Retighten the preload bolt. Some people like to take a little rubber mallet and tap it on both sides to make sure it's set accordingly. So we're just basically, this last step, we're going to make sure everything is tight, snug, and there's no play and no drag on the crank arm. And from that, you will now have a kicker bike with a custom crank length that is adjusted to your size. But wait, there's more. We had a client that tested for us, and they have the KICKR Bike Shift. They said it was a little bit more tugging on the crank assembly, the pulley wheel, because the difference between the Shift and the KICKR bike is that there's no real holes through the pulley assembly to actually grab the pulley and move it up and forward, so you can easily get these bolts more lined up. They did a lot of tugging. They actually took the cover off with a few screws, held the tensioner a little bit looser. They were able to move the pulley forward and start the bolts. And once they got it all wound up, they said it worked perfectly. It's this right crank length that they needed. And they're back up and running on the Wahoo KICKR Bike Shift. So it does work for the Shift as well.